Okay, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk informs me that it is now 7 o'clock, so I would call this special council meeting to order. And again, I would emphasize that it is a special council meeting, and I'm going to suggest that I and we dispense of some of the formalities as long as no one has any problems with that, and we will proceed. So with that, Madam Clerk, are there any agenda announcements or amendments? None whatsoever. Any member of council, any disclosures? None. And again, we just have one item to deal with tonight, but before we get to that, and of course, as you would suspect, I've had conversation with the clerk and the clerk's office there, and making sure that we, including me, do things correct here this evening. Tonight is a special council meeting is with respect to the CEO recruitment process and to receive information from the town's consultant. Council is being asked to review and consider the approval of a candidate profile at tonight's meeting to proceed with the town CAO recruitment process. I wish to remind members of council that any discussions about or any reference to any identifiable individual would not be appropriate during this open session meeting. So with that understanding, keeping in mind that it is an open council meeting, so we have to be very careful in getting into someone that may be identified. So with that, there's only going to be one resolution coming forward this evening. That'll be dealing with the CEO profile and the competency, and this is this document here that I believe that every member of council has, so that'll be the document that we're going to be dealing with. So, Mr. McHarg, if you would introduce the item, please. Where we've been, where we're at, and hopefully where we're going. Troy, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of council, you'll recall that we were before you late summer, early fall to talk about this issue and seek direction to start the recruitment. And once that direction was given, we have, under Megan Mascaren's guidance, engaged Robert Johnston and his firm to start the recruitment process for the CAO selection. And obviously, Robert has spoken to, I believe, every one of you at some point, bringing us to this point. And tonight we are looking for approval of the CAO profile document so that we can hit the ground running hopefully tomorrow with the recruitment beginning. So Robert will be taking council through the document, and what I would suggest, Your Worship, is that this be sort of a workshop style council meeting with a little bit more informality than normal. And this is an important step for council to take. This will be council's opportunity to collectively determine the traits and characteristics that you are looking for in a CAO. So with that, I will turn it over to Robert and ask him to take us through.
Just, Troy, just before you leave there, members of council, are there any questions of that brief overview that you just heard from Troy? If not, Troy, thank you very much. Mr. Johnston, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Troy. Mr. Mayor, members of council, there's a couple of ways we can do this. I assume you've been through it. I can lead you through it in terms of summary, some of the key highlights, get into some competencies, and touch on, if you'd like, the feedback from the stakeholder engagement process. But I'm in your hands. Does that seem reasonable?
Very reasonable. Mr. Johnston, I would suggest with the document that I just made reference to, we're all pretty good, including yours truly, on doing our homework. So I only suspect that every one of my colleagues has had a pretty good look at what we're here. So if you could maybe just highlight some of the areas, that's what I'd suggest, unless any or many of my colleagues have any other comments or any other suggestions. I'm certainly open to them for sure. So I don't see anything else, so then if you maybe would just highlight some of the things that's going to be important for this process.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, if you turn to page 1, there's a summary paragraph that really no pun intended, summarizes the key role of CAO. Any comments or questions with respect to that summary?
Keeping in mind, members of council, that this is just a little wee bit different, so we're going to have to, work our way through that. So, and again, very informal. Councillor Chandler?
Worship, I just, in the summary, and I think as well in terms of some of the other areas, it's just a recommendation, a comment that I'd made when we discussed the matter. I think there needs to be a little more focus on financial, a little more written orientation in that regard. Other than that, I don't have any comments with respect to the summary or the key responsibilities.
If I could then be so bold, I'm going to suggest when suggestions like that come along, that it be direction, as long as the majority of council, unless I see somebody's hand go up and disagree with what John is suggesting. At least I think that it's a good point. So, Mr. Johnson, if you would just take that under advisement.
Absolutely. I do think it's a good point. If you would like to see it in the summary, so be it. We will add it. I would draw your attention to page 2 under management, last bullet. Based on a number of comments from councillors, we added that bullet. Establish procedures to optimize financial resources, exercise financial control, and conduct ongoing reviews on the town's financial position to ensure expectations are being achieved. So we can reword that a little bit and move it into the summary.
At least that's the intent. I think, Councillor Chandler, you want to make sure that that was covered. So on that point, Councillor Chandler, any further?
Fine, thank you.
Councillor Best?
So I agree with Councillor Chandler's point. As we've seen from previous budget presentations and the projected budget for this year, I think there's a very high priority there, as well as the challenges the province may impose on us in the next few years as well. That, from what I've seen from the regional review, it's not over yet.
That's for sure. Okay, that's good.
Okay, very good. Then, Mr. Johnson, if you would proceed then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in key responsibilities, there's 3 key areas, focus areas: leadership, management, and communications. Have we highlighted areas to make you comfortable that that would be part of the summary as well? Or would you like to see anything added?
Again, I'm going to work on assumptions. Unless I see a hand go up, I will assume that everyone, for the most part, is in agreement with that statement. Okay, proceed.
Thank you. I guess I should back up. This was developed based on discussions I personally had with each of you, plus discussions received from commissioners, and appended to the back of this document is a summary of key themes and so on that came through from the discussions I had from members of council and commissioners. So on page 3 is essentially a bullet summary of the key aspects of the candidate profile. We've attempted to cover all key themes and comments that were made by members of council. I think it does cover the key themes that emerged from the stakeholder engagement process. And if there's anything in there that you would like to comment on, add, refine, please let me know.
Mr. Chandler?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, just in terms of the profile, and it talks about track record of success and a leadership role within a multi-stakeholder organization. Consideration might be given there just to say ideally in a municipal environment. Doesn't mean they have to be, but ideally.
Again, just before I get to Councillor Best on that, I know when I had my interview with Mr. Johnson, that's one of the points that I had made at that point in time as well. Councillor Best?
It's a similar vein, just on the profile. It's excellent coverage there, but when, based on your experience of recruiting for our CAOs, is there any standard qualifications that you're looking for in terms of management and experience and also educational requirements? Because that's not something that's listed here. It is, you frequently in other positions you have, okay, you have to have, certain, like an engineer, you have to have an engineering degree. If you're a planner, you have to have a planning degree. What about CAOs? Great
question. We always hesitate to include education. Preference, ideally, would be postgraduate education. However, we always, I think always is acceptable, we always come across in a CAO, city manager search, individuals with a very seasoned track record, but they don't have, they might have an undergraduate degree, or they might only even have college. And so that's why we hesitate to put it in the profile. We could add ideally, but my recommendation would be to exclude it. We would recruit and hopefully find individuals with that postgraduate education. In terms of standards, the real standards we look for are previous CAO experience or number 2 role in a mid to larger sized municipality. And now that we're going to add, ideally in a municipal environment, we wouldn't exclude someone with broader public sector. We would leave that decision to members of council when we come back with a long list of candidates. But we can add it. So ideally, yes, absolutely, municipal experience, CAO, or senior leadership experience in broader public sector, municipal, even private sector. Again, we would leave that decision to council when we come back with the candidate long list. Varied background. Someone, for instance, who has experience in a number of functional areas, let's say finance, but also broader corporate services or even planning or public works. It's rare to find those combinations, but we would look ideally to find an individual with a broader kind of background, not just one functional area. If they weren't a current CAO or didn't have CAO experience, we would look for that broader experience. So those are some, not standards, but those are some of the ideal things we look for in candidates. Does that help?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's not one position where you have to have a standard. It's something you have to be a little flexible on. So I appreciate your input.
Absolutely.
Any further, Councillor Best? Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Your Worship. On the same page, page number 3, you say needs to exhibit a strong horizontal style of leadership, lead initiatives across the organizations rather than using the more traditional up and down approach. Does that just include staff or council as well?
That is meant to include staff only. So horizontal across the organization using the senior leadership team as opposed to just one-on-one delegation, but working with the senior leadership or strategic management team across the organization.
And so with council, it will be top-down?
Council, it would be top-down.
Thank you.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong on that discussion, other than just direction and taking that under advisement. Mr. Johnson, are you clear on what I think those that spoke are looking for?
I am. We will make a couple of minor changes.
I thank you very much. Then if you would proceed.
Thank you. The next key section is preliminary competencies. As we work with council proceeding through the search process, you'll hear me often refer to competencies, and we must interview against the competencies. Call them selection criteria if you want. We'll be developing interview questions based on your input, but to get at many of these leadership competencies. They're in no particular order. But I believe they really address the key themes that came out through the stakeholder engagement with councillors. Most of them are common across executive leadership roles. Some are particular to the municipal sector, but they're very important, and as I said earlier, you will constantly hear me coming back to, no, we're not interested in your gut feeling. Let's talk about the competencies that you've approved, we want to interview against, and select against. Any comments there?
Thoughts or comments, Councillor Chandler?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just on page 6, fiscal accountability. I think the language might be, the headline might be better as fiscal acumen, and perhaps if there was consideration given to, what that means. So accountability, yes, but acumen as well, in terms of, the ability to read a balance sheet at its most basic flavor, the ability to understand, how an operating budget and a capital budget should be presented in a municipal environment, and frankly, the ability to enunciate that to council as necessary. It's not solely the responsibility of the treasurer to do that, and really the leadership ultimately begins and ends with the CAO on financial matters. So I just wondered if that makes sense, could be weaved in. I don't disagree with what's there. I just think that it needs something in front of it with respect to competency, financial competency. So that's why I'm suggesting financial acumen.
Okay, and again, Ms. Johnson, I'm sure you've got that noted, and that'll be given due consideration in that area. Councillor Best?
It's similar. It doesn't have to be written down, but it's just something looking at all these areas. You could have a very competent person, but may not have the experience that we need. And my concern is, and as I mentioned to you earlier, that Milton's a very evolving community. We have a mix of rural and urban, and a huge growth rate. I don't want to find someone that basically came from a very static community that didn't have those challenges. And I don't know how you can't really word that, but it's something that we have to look for. Someone that basically has done the dynamics of realizing you having a community that right now is 125,000 people, that could be 300,000 people in a few years' time, and realizing you have to change not only corporately, but also, as a council, where do you go from here, and also have that type of ability. You can't really put that into words, but something where you're looking for similar communities, because there's some communities that they're basically just trying to hang on. That takes a different ability than something that's where we're experiencing.
Good point.
Okay, I think the message is Mr. Johnson has that, what we're looking for. Anything further on that point? If not, again, Ms. Johnson, if you would proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the last section is really just a summary of the stakeholder input, comments aggregated into themes or areas. I must compliment members of council. There was, for the most part, consensus. You can see the themes running through, no major differences, so I compliment council. It's a matter for us now to take the ideal profile. We'll post a job ad various places on the internet. We will go away, also do our direct sourcing or headhunting across the country, and it's up to us to come back with a long list of candidates that hopefully meet the ideal profile. So I don't know that we need to go through the stakeholder summary, but if there's any questions or comments, I'd be delighted to address them.
That again is certainly what I'm going to suggest, Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. The only comment I would make under abilities is fiscally literate. I think you get my theme.
I do, Councillor.
And this really is a time for any comments or observations and or opinions as well, so as Mr. Johnson gets what we are thinking. Not seeing much, so Mr. Johnson, you must have done a pretty good job with the 9 of us on those interviews. Councilor Chandler?
I just totally agree with your comment. You know, you and Colin and I think Rick as well were involved in hiring 2 other CAOs, and this is the best summary I've seen in the last 25 years. It's an excellent job.
I didn't certainly concur with those comments. Mr. Johnson, is there anything further that you have to add, or any questions that you might have of us? Any observations, opinions, or comments?
The only comment I'd like to make, Mr. Mayor, is I look forward to working with you and members of council as we proceed down this path.
And I thank you very much. Now, Commissioner McHarg, are you clear on where we've been? Are you clear where we're at? More particularly as the head of staff right in this process, are you clear where we're going?
We are 100% clear, Your Worship.
I think that's going to be very important in this process being led by you. Members of council, you heard me mention before there's only one item on the agenda, and we just dealt with that. And I have a motion that's been moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Chandler, and be it resolved that the CAO profile and competency document prepared by Robert Johnson Organization Consulting Limited, known as OCL, dated November the 8th, 2019, be approved as amended. And that those amendments were taken as directions. Okay, so everyone's clear on that. Any questions on this motion? If not, those in favor. And that's carried unanimously, I might add. Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything? Nothing whatsoever. Members of council, members of staff, ladies and gentlemen, the special council meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.